So there has been sad news that has broke this evening that Liu Xiaobo, the Chinese Nobel Peace Laureate, has passed away at the age of 61. He died in a hospital in Shenyang under guard. He'd been permitted temporary parole from an 11-year prison sentence, and as far as I understand, he passed away from liver disease. But I have no doubt that his condition was exacerbated by the cruelty of the regime that imprisoned him. My thoughts at the moment are first and foremost with Liu Xia, his devoted wife, who's shown a lot of courage as well. And my heart really goes out to her. It must be a very difficult time. There has been condemnation around the world from in regard to the way the Chinese authorities treated Mr. Xiaobo and how Mr. Liu, I should say, that's a Chinese forename, comes first. But I feel angry and saddened, and not specifically about the news, but about the responses that I've been seeing online, which are predictable, unfortunately. This is notable because Liu Xiaobo was the first Nobel laureate to die in custody since Karl von Ossietzky in 1938. Karl von Ossietzky was a German pacifist who won the 1935 Nobel Peace Prize and died in a concentration camp. Shamefully, Hitler refused representation on his behalf to pick up the award. Likewise, shamefully, the Chinese authorities, the communist authorities, I should say, refused Liu Xiaobo any sort of representation to go to Oslo in 2010 to pick up the award. And I remember at that time it caused significant tension between the West, and particularly Norway, and Beijing. Beijing interpreted it as interfering in their internal affairs, and, which is basically just their excuse to say we can do whatever we want. Doesn't matter if we're breaking international law. It doesn't matter if we're trampling the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's just another testament to the arrogance of the Chinese Communist Party. But basically, I've been seeing lots of comments from Chinese nationalists, the usual CCP trolls, coming on. I saw one guy tell the BBC to shut up. Someone else said if Mr. Liu Xiaobo had his way, China would be Syria, completely ignoring the fact that Liu Xiaobo has never advocated violence. He has never advocated any sort of violent overthrow of the government. His only crime was dedicating his life to human rights. In fact, he personally saved hundreds of lives during the Tiananmen crackdown by negotiating a large group of students to withdraw from a confrontation. So, as bloody as that day was, there would have been even more casualties had it not been for his intervention. In 2008, he drafted Charter 08, advocating democracy and greater human rights in China. It also pointed out the many crimes the Chinese Communist Party has perpetrated. The anti-rightist campaign that persecuted up to 500,000 people, many on false charges of being right-wing, counter-revolutionaries. It documented the Cultural Revolution, the millions of unnecessary deaths from the Great Leap Forward, and of course the Tiananmen crackdown. So he was sentenced to 11 years the following year for incitement to subversion of state power. The way that the Communist Party has attacked Liu Xiaobo, when people like him, he is the most prominent Chinese dissident, although I would suggest Ai Weiwei is pretty well known as well. But the way they have done this is to vilify him. Chinese people have either not heard of Liu Xiaobo, and those who have, many of them hate him. Why? Because they have believed the Communist Party's propaganda that he's somehow a danger to China, that because he stands against the CCP, then he's anti-Chinese, he's against the country, he's some sort of Western puppet. These are the usual sort of this is the usual sort of jargon to vilify dissidents, and not just in China. You see it in dictatorships all over the world. But what's unfortunate is a lot of people are taken in by it. So, for example, they claim that Liu Xiaobo made a comment about China being would be better under colonialism. Now, I don't know how truthful that is, whether he said that or not. But what I would say is the patience and the strength this man and his wife have shown is remarkable. There are many people when pushed under those circumstances would not be peaceful, would rise up. The truth is, this thuggish regime in Beijing relies on lies. They've whitewashed their entire history, and I'm not going to get into. I don't want to focus this video entirely on, all the reasons why I detest this style of governing, but um, there has been international criticism that the authorities refused to allow Liu Xiaobo to travel abroad for treatment in a hospital of his choice, where he would have got presumably better treatment. Um, Chinese hospitals vary in terms of their facilities. Um, Carrie Lam, being the CC puppet that she is, the new chief executive, handpicked chief executive of Hong Kong, claimed that the authorities would show him compassion. Make no mistake about it, allowing him parole to be in this hospital in Shenyang was nothing of the sort. It was just a propaganda drive. If they really wanted to show compassion, they would have allowed him the right to travel abroad. He was critically ill. It's not as if he could have, launched any sort of protests. What infuriates me most of all, what frustrates me most of all when it comes to China, is the lack of a play balance, the lack of. It's just simply not a level playing field, because when Chinese nationals come to Western countries, and if you look at their profiles on Facebook, they always live in Western countries, or at least countries that don't censor the internet. They have far more freedom to promote the Communist Party and defend the Communist Party in, say, France or Australia or Canada or Britain or wherever, than Chinese dissidents have to criticize the Communist Party within China. The CCP always uses this thing about, oh, don't interfere in our internal affairs as an excuse, but they are actually breaking international law. This goes beyond Chinese jurisdiction. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which they have basically pissed on since its inception. Um, I don't know if this is ever going to change in my lifetime. I don't think there is, at this point, quite the level of public desire for that to change, because when Chinese people hear about democracy, they automatically think, oh, we're going to end up like Syria. I don't think that would happen. I think they understandably want stability. I can absolutely understand that. But Liu Xiaobo was not calling for violent insurrection. He was not calling for China as a country not to exist. He was simply calling for basic human rights and China to uphold that in international law. And despite all the hardship that he and his wife faced, he was the eternal optimist. So this is sad news, but we can also read it as all over the world tonight, millions of people will be thinking about this man and the communist regime. There's nothing they can do about it. There's not a damn thing they can do to stop the BBC or any other network outside China reporting this. And that's a good thing. On the wider issues, I'm realistic enough to know that we simply cannot cut trade with every country that has a very dubious human rights record. I'm realistic enough to know that pretty much every country has its skeletons, and it wouldn't be realistic to say we don't like this system of government, so we're never going to talk to them. But I do think that for a long time we've had this idea that because China is very powerful, because of trade, and because of this kind of sense of confident nationalism that the Xi era has promoted, that we are completely powerless to do anything. I think that's misguided. I do think that we should be very outspoken on these sort of issues. And state media, global times can rant all they want about interfering Westerners and about interfering in China's internal affairs. When history comes to be written, the only thing that matters is the truth. This world is flawed, and it's an unfortunate and depressing reality that an authoritarian regime like the one in Beijing is not going to go anytime soon, and there's no evidence that it's going to reform anytime soon. Like I've said in the previous videos, if anything, in the Xi era, there has been a greater crackdown on this. There's been a greater crackdown on freedom of information. This is not to say that 1.4 billion Chinese people are mindless communist serfs. That is not the case. And in that sense, things have greatly improved since Mao's era. But that has been replaced. This sort of blind subservience to Maoist ideology has been replaced, in a sense, by neo-nationalism and promoting this abroad. It's very palpable. And unfortunately, you know, overseas Chinese take full advantage of it, and they know that we can't arrest them for praising the Communist Party, because then we would be as bad as the Communist Party. But I do think we should be assertive and point out their hypocrisy. And my message to any Chinese people living in the West is you have to understand, in a multi-party system where there is freedom of information, you cannot you cannot silence criticism of the CCP regime. You can't. You can have your opinion, but expect rebukes. Expect people to challenge you. The problem is in China there's simply no level playing field, and that's disgusting. It's the very epitome of bullying. I mean, to deny people a voice. So I have nothing but respect for the courage that people like Liu Xiaobo show, have shown, and still show. There's many dissidents not as famous as Mr. Xiaobo who are also very brave and who have endured lots of personal hardship. The Chinese media is completely controlled by the Communist Party, so they'll never, they won't be reporting this. On a personal basis, I sometimes really feel like talking about these issues. I engage often on Chinese social media. I've got a lot of Chinese contacts, but it's a really difficult thing for me because, on one hand, I believe in standing up for my conviction, but if I were to, I actually put something on my QQ, which is a Chinese social media site, as the status. It immediately disappeared. I'd written R.I.P. Liu Xiaobo. It wasn't even an overtly political message. It wasn't like rise up against the CCP or something like that. No, it immediately disappeared. Immediately. And I wonder, are they already getting into overdrive to try and censor any mention of his name? Because at the moment my internet's running smoothly. I don't think it's a technical issue. But I could say something like this on one of these websites, and unfortunately, I couldn't be entirely sure that the people I'm connected with wouldn't, because the nationalism is so deeply entrenched. And this is not to say that all Chinese people are mindless, heartless CCP drones. That really isn't the case. A lot of them are intelligent and open-minded and will think for themselves, but that defensiveness is very deeply entrenched. And otherwise decent people, unfortunately, are not immune to it. So I admit this is something that causes me some sadness. It's a gulf between me and my Chinese friends. It's not something that I would. It's not. I mean, I have had discussions with people about these things, but I've tried to avoid it because it's always ended up in a misunderstanding or an argument, which is similar to the video I mentioned the other day. Anyway, I'm going to round this up. But rest in peace, Liu Xiaobo. My thoughts are with his brave wife, Lucia, and with every other dissident in the People's Republic of China. These people deserve a lot more than the scorn they get from the thugs in Beijing, the bullies in Beijing. They're not enemies of the state. They're not terrorists. And their only crime is to advocate human rights. That is it. I would make one last point. If communism is so great, and this is my point to CCP apologists, you like to talk about they've lifted millions of people out of poverty. If they're so great, why are they scared of different opinions? Why are they scared of not allowing dissenters to have their view? If they're so wonderful, they could counter it. They could counter those opinions. They could debate about it. But they're cowards. They're too scared to let these people have a voice. That is a fundamental difference between a single party state and multi party democracies. Whatever faults you can find in democracies, and goodness knows there are many, it's one thing I would never ever take for granted is the fact that we can at least have the freedom to voice dissent. And there's simply no comparison between that and a single party state. I mean, imagine the situation if people in the UK criticised Theresa May, then the Conservative Party turned around and said they're enemies of the British people, not of the Conservative Party, of the British people. That's what this CCP regime does. Instead of portraying it as they're criticising us, they say you're attacking the Chinese people. And likewise, apologists who go overseas and defend them say, oh, but we're not connected with the CCP. And yet, the paradox of this is they're defending the CCP. So they can't complain about being associated with it. They can't complain about being called CCP trolls, paid agents of the Communist Party, when they are acting as apologists for them. If you're not going to show any sort of open minded approach, if you're going to slavishly defend the CCP, don't expect and don't be surprised when people say that you're just working for them. Whether it's true or not, that is how it comes across. But the only thing that matters in the end of the day is the truth. Liu Xiaobo stood for truth.